After 9 years of marriage, I discovered I was never legally his wife. My name is Sarah, I'm 34 years old, and I thought I knew exactly who I was: a devoted wife, a mother of two beautiful children, and a woman who had built her entire adult life around the man she loved. This is the story of how everything I believed about my life turned out to be a lie. Like, subscribe, and stay with me for this unbelievable true story. I met Daniel when I was 23, fresh out of college and working my first real job at a marketing firm in Chicago. He was 28, confident, charming, and he had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and I said yes without a single hesitation. My parents adored him, my friends were jealous, and I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Our wedding day was everything I'd dreamed of. A small ceremony in my hometown, about 70 guests, white roses everywhere, and Daniel standing at the altar looking at me like I was his entire world. We exchanged vows, we kissed, everyone cheered, and we drove off to our honeymoon in Hawaii, feeling like nothing could ever touch us. I remember thinking that this was it. This was the beginning of forever. The first few years were good. We moved into a small apartment, then bought our first house when I was 27. I got pregnant with our daughter Emma a year after the wedding, and our son Lucas came 2 years later. Daniel worked in finance, long hours, but good money, and I went part-time at my job so I could be home more with the kids. We had the normal struggles: sleepless nights, money stress, arguments about whose turn it was to change diapers, but we always got through it. At least, that's what I thought. Looking back now, I can see the small things that didn't quite add up, but at the time, I brushed them off as nothing. Daniel was always protective of his mail. If something came for him, he'd grab it before I could even glance at it and take it straight to his office. He handled all our finances, paid all the bills, and whenever I suggested we sit down together and go over our budget, he'd say he had it under control and I didn't need to worry about it. He traveled for work sometimes, usually just overnight trips, and he was always vague about the details. But I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the father of my children, the man who told me he loved me every single day. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. Everything changed last year in March. Daniel had been acting strange for a few weeks, more distant, more irritable, spending even more time in his office with the door locked. I asked him if something was bothering him, and he said it was just work stress. Then, one Saturday morning, he told me he needed to run some errands, and he'd be back in a few hours. He left his laptop open on the kitchen table. I wasn't trying to snoop, I really wasn't, but his email was open on the screen, and I saw a message at the top of his inbox from someone named Jennifer. The subject line said, "We need to talk about the kids." My stomach dropped. I clicked on it before I could stop myself. The email was from a woman claiming that Daniel owed her child support for their two children, a girl who was 10 and a boy who was 7. She said he hadn't made a payment in 3 months, and she was going to take legal action if he didn't get current immediately. She called him her ex-husband. Ex-husband. I sat there staring at the screen, reading the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. This had to be a mistake. Some kind of scam, maybe, or someone with the same name. But then I scrolled down and saw his reply from 2 weeks earlier. He apologized for being late with the payments, said things were tight financially, and promised he'd send money by the end of the month. He signed it, "I know I messed up our marriage, but I'm trying to do right by the kids." I felt like I was going to be sick. I opened his sent folder and started digging. There were dozens of emails going back years. Emails about custody schedules, school events, medical bills, birthday presents. Emails where he called this woman by pet names, where he talked about missing his other children, where he made excuses for why he couldn't visit more often. And then I found the one that destroyed me completely. It was an email to a lawyer from 4 months after our wedding. Daniel was asking about the status of his divorce from Jennifer and whether it had been finalized. The lawyer responded that there had been a problem with the paperwork, that Jennifer had never signed the final documents, and the divorce was not legally complete. I had never been his wife. Not legally. Our marriage certificate meant nothing because he was still married to someone else when we stood at that altar. For 9 years I had been living as his wife, raising our children, building a life together, and the entire time it was all based on a lie. When Daniel came home that afternoon, I was waiting for him at the kitchen table with his laptop open in front of me. He saw the screen and his face went completely white. He started to speak, but I held up my hand and told him I didn't want to hear it. I asked him one question. How long had he known? He stood there for a long moment, and then he sat down across from me and told me everything. He'd been married to Jennifer for 6 years before they separated. They'd filed for divorce, but she'd been angry and vindictive and refused to sign the final papers. He said he'd planned to tell me, but then I got pregnant with Emma and he panicked. He thought if he told me the truth, I'd leave him, so he just kept quiet and hoped the divorce would eventually go through. Then years passed, and it became easier to just keep hiding it. He had 2 other children, a daughter and a son, living 3 hours away with their mother. He saw them once a month when he claimed he was traveling for work. He'd been paying child support the entire time we were together, which explained why our finances were always tighter than they should have been. He'd lied to me about everything: where his money was going, where he was going, who he was, what our marriage actually meant, and he'd let me believe I was his wife for 9 years. I told him to leave. He tried to argue, said we could fix this, that he loved me and we could make it work, but I couldn't even look at him. He packed a bag and went to stay with his brother, and I sat alone in our house trying to figure out what to do next. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to tell my parents, my friends, everyone who thought I'd been happily married for almost a decade. I had to explain to Emma and Lucas, who were 8 and 6 at the time, why their father wasn't living with us anymore. I had to figure out what my legal rights even were, because technically I wasn't his spouse. I wasn't entitled to anything a divorced wife would be entitled to. I hired a lawyer, and she laid out the brutal reality. Because our marriage was never legal, I had no claim to any marital assets. The house was in both our names, but he'd put down the down payment before we got together, so his share was larger. I had no right to spousal support or alimony. The only thing I could fight for was child support for Emma and Lucas, which I absolutely did. My lawyer filed a petition for custody and support, and we started the long, painful process of untangling our lives. Daniel tried to reconcile at first. He sent me long texts and emails apologizing, saying he'd made a terrible mistake and he wanted to fix things. He even offered to finally finalize his divorce with Jennifer so we could get legally married. But I was done. I couldn't imagine ever trusting him again. Couldn't imagine looking at him without seeing all the lies. I told him we were over, and if he wanted to be in Emma and Lucas's lives, he could do it through a formal custody arrangement. The hardest part wasn't even the betrayal, as terrible as that was. It was realizing how much of my identity had been tied to being his wife. I'd built my entire adult life around this man and this marriage, and now I had to figure out who I even was without it. I'd given up career opportunities to stay home more with the kids. I'd moved away from my hometown to be closer to his job. I'd made 1,000 small sacrifices because I thought we were building a life together as husband and wife, and none of it had been real. It took months to sort out the legal mess. Daniel eventually finalized his divorce from Jennifer, which was its own nightmare because she was furious when she found out about me and the kids. The house had to be sold because neither of us could afford to buy the other out. We split the proceeds based on what we'd each contributed, which meant I walked away with less than half. I moved into a small rental with Emma and Lucas, and I went back to work full-time. Daniel got standard visitation, every other weekend and one evening a week, and he was ordered to pay child support for our kids, in addition to what he owed Jennifer for his other children. I spent a lot of time angry. Angry at Daniel for lying to me, angry at myself for not seeing the signs, angry at the universe for letting this happen. I went to therapy, which helped, and I leaned on my parents and my closest friends. Slowly, painfully, I started to rebuild. It's been 1.5 years now since I found that email. Emma and Lucas are doing okay, considering everything they've been through. They see their father regularly, and they've even met their half-siblings a few times, which was awkward at first, but has gotten easier. Daniel and I are civil when we need to be for the kids' sake, but we're not friends. I don't think we ever will be. I'm dating again now, which feels strange and scary and exciting all at once. I'm being more careful this time, asking more questions, trusting my gut when something feels off. I'm also focusing on myself in a way I never did before, going back to school part-time to get my master's degree, spending time with friends, rediscovering hobbies I'd let go of over the years. I still have hard days, days when I feel stupid for not seeing the truth sooner, days when I wonder how I'll ever trust anyone again, days when I'm overwhelmed by the weight of being a single mother, working full-time, and trying to keep everything together. But I also have good days now, days when I feel strong and capable and proud of how far I've come. The truth is, I'm not the same person I was before all of this happened. That version of me was naive, maybe too trusting, too willing to accept what I was told without asking questions. The person I am now is harder in some ways, but also more resilient. I know my worth now in a way I didn't before. I know I deserve honesty, respect, and real partnership, not lies and half-truths, and a relationship built on deception. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll find real love again someday, the kind that's built on truth and trust from the very beginning. Maybe I won't, and that's okay too. What I do know is that I'm going to be fine. My kids are going to be fine. We're building a new life, a different life than the one I thought we'd have, but it's ours and it's real, and that's worth more than any lie ever was. If this story touched you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and which moment hit you the most. Thank you for listening.